Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public scoping meeting for the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Thank you all very much for joining. We're very appreciative of having a number of people who have joined and are able to participate this evening. My name is Emily Capello, and I am the consultant for the BLM, and I'm going to be facilitating the meeting tonight. Tonight's scoping meeting will include an introduction by the Las Vegas Field Office Acting Field Manager, Corrine Francis, followed by introductions of the participants by the BLM Southern Nevada District and Panorama Environmental Inc., the third-party contractor who's facilitating tonight's session. After introductions, Whitney Worthland, BLM Project Manager, will present on the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project and provide a short overview of the BLM process. Following the presentations, there will be a question and answer session facilitated by Panorama Environmental with responses from the BLM. And then we will open up the forum for public input. Then we will close out for the evening. This meeting will be recorded and the video will be posted to the project information webpage at the address in the screen. We will also post that address in the chat. Now we will turn it over to Corrine Francis, Acting Las Vegas Field Manager, for a short introduction and an overview of our presenters and other participants for this evening's scoping meeting.
Thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public scoping meeting for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. My name is Corrine Francis, and I am the Acting Field Manager for the BLM Las Vegas Field Office. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. The Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project is located in the Pahrump Valley, south of State Routes 160 and adjacent to the Clark-Nye County line. The BLM completed the variance review for this project in May of this year and has initiated the environmental planning required by the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA. Input provided during the variance review will be carried forward into this NEPA process for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. These virtual scoping meetings, along with the scoping period that will be open until December 5th, are part of the first steps of the NEPA process. During scoping, BLM asks for comments and input on the proposed project to better understand potential issues and concerns, as well as develop a reasonable range of alternatives to the proposed action. The presentation tonight is intended to inform all of you of the project details, such as type of solar facility, location, size, timeline, and issues already identified through the variance review. We will explain the NEPA process and what kind of information will be most helpful during the scoping period. Before we begin, I want to make sure everyone knows that we're still in the early stage of the NEPA process, so we may not have all the answers to your in-depth or specific questions. We will work hard to provide answers to your questions later in the meeting, but please know that even hearing your questions will help us better understand what needs to be analyzed. Before we begin with the presentation, I would like to introduce you to the speakers today. Whitney Worthland is the project manager for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, and she will be providing the overview presentation on the project as well as the NEPA process. Whitney is also joined by other BLM staff members who are shown on the screen and are working behind the scenes to help answer your questions later in this meeting. At this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Emily to go over tonight's meeting format. Thank you.
Thank you, Corrine. Tonight's forum will provide opportunities for questions and public input. There will be a question and answer session where written questions can be submitted. There will also be an opportunity for verbal public input toward the end of the scoping meeting. We'll have more information on these two opportunities later on. The BLM is also providing opportunity after the scoping meeting for public input and questions until December 5th, 2022. Input and questions can be submitted via the Participate Now button on ePlanning, email to the email address on the screen, or via mail to the BLM Southern Nevada District Office. We will also provide this information in the chat for this forum. As mentioned on this slide, before including your address, phone number, email address, or other personal identifying information in your comment, you should be aware that your entire comment, including your personal identifying information, may be publicly available at any time. While you can ask that your personal identifying information be withheld from public review, BLM cannot guarantee that they are able to do so. Anonymity is not allowed for submissions from organizations or businesses and from individuals identifying themselves as representatives or officials of organizations or businesses. Now Whitney will present an overview of the Rough Hat Clark County project, as well as the BLM solar application evaluation process.
Thank you, Emily, and good evening, everyone. Candela Renewables submitted a right-of-way application for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project for the construction, operation, maintenance, and eventual decommissioning of a proposed 400 megawatt solar photovoltaic power generating facility with interconnection to the regional transmission system and battery storage of up to 200 megawatts. The project is proposed on approximately 2,400 acres of BLM administered lands within the Pahrump Valley, southeast of the town of Pahrump and 35 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Due to the location of the project on variance lands identified in the Solar Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, or Solar PEIS, the project was subject to the variance process. The BLM issued a variance determination on the project in May 2022, which determined it appropriate to initiate the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, process for the project. Additional information on the variance process for the project will be presented later in the meeting and can be found at the project webpage, which we will have included a link for in the chat. The map on the screen shows the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project as the red triangle in the middle of the map, adjacent to the Clark-Nye County line and south of State Route 160. Candela Renewables has proposed a generation tie, or GenTie, transmission line for the project, which is shown in green on the map. The proposed GenTie line parallels State Route 160 before turning south to the constructed Trout Canyon substation, identified as the black rectangle on the map. Existing transmission line and infrastructure would then be utilized to transmit the electricity to the grid. This map shows the location of the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project in relation to local roads and streets within the Pahrump Valley area, including Tacoma Springs Road, Brown Springs Road, Route 16, Hafen Ranch Road, and Trout Canyon Road. The table on the screen shows the proposed project components. The Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project includes the installation of solar arrays within the project area, which are composed of solar photovoltaic modules on fixed tilt or single access mounting systems. The solar arrays would connect to the power conversion stations that would help transmit electricity to the on-site substation through a series of above ground and underground collection systems. Once the electricity reaches the on-site substation, it is delivered off-site to the constructed Trout Canyon substation via the proposed interconnection GenTie line. The project would also include the construction of battery storage facilities, which are planned to store up to 200 megawatts of energy. Additional facilities proposed for construction include an operations and maintenance building, communication facilities, meteorological stations, and site and security fencing. The preliminary plan of development for the proposed project is available online at the project webpage, which we'll provide a link to in the chat. The map on the screen shows the layout of the proposed solar arrays, project fence line, inter-array access roads, on-site substation and office building, and conduit areas. The proposed solar arrays avoid major drainages that occur throughout the project area, as shown by aerial imagery beneath. Along with the analysis of the proposed solar project components, the environmental impact statement will include analysis of a resource management plan amendment for the visual resource management class that intersects the project. The BLM land use plans are referred to as resource management plans, or RMPs. The RMP provides guidance for proposed projects and decisions within a geographic area and helps BLM manage those identified public lands. For the BLM Southern Nevada District, the approved RMP is the 1998 Las Vegas RMP. BLM regulations require that all actions and authorizations conform to the approved RMP. If a specific project cannot be modified sufficiently to conform to the RMP, then the RMP may be amended so that that project can then achieve the required conformance. In the case of the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, the BLM anticipates a RMP amendment to address project conformance with the area's Visual Resource Management, or VRM, classification, which was designated as VRM Class 3 in the RMP. BLM is considering amending the RMP so that the Visual Resource Management classification of the project area may be modified from Class 3 to Class 4. A utility scale solar project, such as the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, would be compatible with VRM Class 4 management objectives and therefore in conformance with the RMP. BLM will analyze the proposed RMP amendment in the same NEPA environmental impact statement as the solar project itself. As the environmental impact statement includes a RMP amendment, the draft EIS must be made available for a 90-day public comment period, and the final EIS must be presented to the governor's office for a 60-day consistency review to ensure that the project is consistent with state and local plans, policies, and programs. During the scoping period, the BLM provides preliminary planning criteria for review, which is available at the project website. The flowchart on the screen shows the application evaluation process, which begins with the submittal of a solar project application. The application is then prioritized based on the regulations and involves interdisciplinary team review. This helps BLM prioritize and process the solar application workload more efficiently. After prioritization, the applications move into the solar application evaluation process, which includes the variance process and involves public information forums and agency coordination. When the evaluation is complete, the BLM will determine whether to continue to process the application and initiate the NEPA process. For the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, the BLM determined to continue processing the application and initiate the NEPA process. These scoping meetings are part of the early stages of the NEPA process for the project. The BLM completed a review of the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project through the variance process described under the Solar PEIS. The variance process involved public outreach and coordination with appropriate federal, state, local, and tribal governance. Input was gathered through 2 virtual public information forums, an agency meeting, and associated input periods. During the public input period, 19 verbal comments and 45 additional input submissions via email or physical mail were received. Agency coordination on the project yielded 3 comment letters received during the input period. In addition to public and agency input, BLM sent letters and conducted field trips for Native American tribes to assess interest and concerns with the project. BLM also sent letters to initiate formal government-to-government consultation. Tribal consultation is ongoing for the project. Additional information on the input received during the variance process for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project can be found at the project webpage. On the screen, you will see a flowchart outlining the NEPA process for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. The NEPA process begins with the publication of a notice of intent announcing the intentions of the BLM to complete an environmental impact statement, and in the case of this project, a resource management plan amendment. The notice of intent for the project was published on October 21st, 2022, and initiates the 45-day public scoping period. The scoping meeting tonight is included in this step of the NEPA process. After scoping, the BLM reviews comments provided, generates issues to analyze, identifies any suggested alternatives, and develops the draft environmental impact statement and draft resource management plan amendment. The draft environmental impact statement for the project and resource management plan amendment are published for a 90-day public review period, initiated by the publication of a notice of availability. Comments submitted during the public review period are reviewed and substantive comments are responded to in the final EIS and proposed resource management plan amendment. The final EIS and proposed resource management plan amendment are made available for 30 days with publication of a notice of availability. During the availability period, there is an additional review of the documents through a 30-day protest period and the Nevada governor's consistency review of the final EIS and proposed resource management plan. If protests are received, they are responded to, and if no additional changes to the documents are necessary, then BLM would issue a record of decision for the environmental impact statement, which, if the project is approved, a right-of-way grant and notice to proceed would be generated. Input received during the variance process yield preliminary concerns identified by the public, local, state, federal agencies, and tribes, which are displayed on this slide. Additionally, the BLM conducted internal scoping of the project with the interdisciplinary team, which also generated preliminary resource concerns. These resources and issues will be considered during the analysis for the environmental impact statement. In order to adequately analyze the effects of the project, multiple resource technical studies have been completed or are scheduled to be completed. The list on the screen shows the technical studies currently required for the project, as well as the status or timeframe on when they would be completed. After the public scoping period, the BLM will determine if any additional technical studies are needed to analyze the effects from the project. The next few slides provide additional information on issues and resource concerns identified during the input period for the variance process, as well as review of the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project by the BLM interdisciplinary team. These issues and resource concerns will be considered during the NEPA analysis for the project, along with those additional issues and resource concerns identified during the scoping process. Input gathered on the project identified potential concerns for biological and vegetation resources from the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Issues identified included effects to special status wildlife species, like the threatened and endangered desert tortoise, and impacts to sensitive vegetation and soils from the proposed solar project. To assist in the analysis of these identified resource concerns, the BLM has coordinated with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is required to complete Section 7 consultation in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. This will include receiving a biological opinion for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as a desert tortoise translocation plan. Additionally, the BLM has initiated coordination with the Nevada Department of Wildlife about potential impacts from the project. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Nevada Department of Wildlife have accepted cooperating agency status for the project. Input received and BLM interdisciplinary review of the proposed project also identified issues and concerns related to visual resources and recreation opportunities within the project area. These included issues related to the visual resource management class for the area, views from State Route 160 and surrounding communities, view of the proposed project from the Old Spanish National Historic Trail, access to public lands, and recreation use of the project area, including off-highway vehicle use, hiking, equestrian use, and camping. In order to help analyze these concerns, visual resource simulations are being completed, which would be fully described in a visual resources technical report. Additionally, the BLM and the applicant will be gathering data of use of trails within and adjacent to the proposed project area. Input gathered also identified potential concerns with cultural and tribal resources from the proposed project. Input identified the project proximity to the Old Spanish National Historic Trail. Further review determined that the project is more than 7 miles from the National Historic Trail, which is outside of the preliminary 5-mile trail corridor. Additional cultural resource and tribal concerns were identified. To help address and analyze these resource concerns, the BLM will be consulting with the Nevada State Historic Preservation Office under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. This consultation process will be incorporated with the NEPA process for the project, and additional information on the National Historic Preservation Act process can be found at the project website. A cultural resources report was completed for the project, which BLM has reviewed, provided initial site recommendations, and transmitted the report and recommendations to the Nevada State Historic Preservation Office for their review and concurrence. The BLM has initiated engagement with Native American tribal governments, which included sending letters to invite the tribes to initiate formal government-to-government consultation and field trips to the proposed project. The BLM has also invited the tribes to participate as cooperating agencies for the project. Tribal consultation for the project is ongoing. Potential impacts to socioeconomics and air quality from the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project were submitted during the input period. These included impacts to the local economies and communities, job creation, valley fever, and climate change. To assist with the analysis of these issues, the BLM and third-party NEPA contractor are working on an economic modeling report and an air quality modeling and associated report. Issues related to water use, identified source, stormwater, and erosion concerns were gathered during the input period and BLM interdisciplinary review of the project. The applicant will be required, as necessary, to receive a Section 404 Clean Water Act permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for any jurisdictional waters that may be impacted by the project. Jurisdictional waters determination for the project is ongoing. The BLM will require a water supply assessment be completed by the applicant, which would identify the water source which would be utilized during construction and operation for the proposed project. Candela Renewables is currently assessing water sources within the project area and will be providing an updated water supply assessment. Additionally, the applicant will provide a drainage study for the proposed project, which BLM and other federal and local governments will review. Candela Renewables will also be required to obtain permits for the project from Clark County. Input gathered during the variance process yield concerns about the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project in relation to other proposed projects within the Pahrump Valley area. Impacts from the proposed project and other actions within a given area and timeframe will be analyzed as part of the cumulative effects analysis for the project. Cumulative effects are those impacts on the environment that result from the incremental impact of the proposed action when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions, regardless of who is undertaking the action. This means actions proposed on federal, state, local, or private lands within an identified area and timeframe would be included in the cumulative effects analysis. On the screen, you will see a map of the proposed solar projects within the Pahrump Valley that are at various stages of review and processing by the BLM. These proposed projects are considered reasonably foreseeable future projects and would be included in the cumulative effects analysis for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions will be identified during the NEPA process, including the scoping period. On the map, you will see the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project highlighted in purple striping. On the map, you will also see the 4 other proposed projects and 1 currently authorized project located within the Pahrump Valley. The Copper Race Solar Project, shown as the blue colored boundary, completed application evaluation in March of 2022. The scoping period for the Copper Race Solar Project initiated on November 14th, 2022, and scoping meetings will occur on December 6th and December 7th, 2022. We will include information on how to register for those meetings in the chat. The Golden Current and Mosey projects, shown in brown and teal on the map respectively, are currently undergoing review. The Golden Current project is undergoing variance process review. The Mosey Solar Project is undergoing internal BLM review and was determined to be a medium priority project. The Rough Hat Nye County Solar Project, shown as the green colored boundary, is currently paused while the applicant coordinates with Nye County and the local community to address concerns with the proposed project layout. On the map, you will also see the location of the approved Yellow Pine Solar Project, shown in yellow, which was authorized with a record of decision in the fall of 2020. If you have any information on additional projects or actions within or adjacent to the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, that information would be helpful for the NEPA analysis. Currently, we are in the public scoping period for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Tonight's public scoping meeting and the scoping period that lasts until December 5th, 2022, provide you an opportunity to provide comments on the project. The information gathered during the meeting and the scoping period will inform the NEPA process and assist BLM in determining issues, impacts, and potential alternatives that will be addressed in the upcoming analysis. After the public scoping meetings have concluded, we will continue to gather comments on the project until December 5th, 2022. The information we gather will be considered in the draft environmental impact statement and resource management plan amendment, which is expected summer of 2023. More information on the project can be found at the project webpage on the screen. We have also provided this information in the chat. Helpful input and comments from you would include suggestions on how to refine the proposed project with methods for reducing or avoiding impacts to resources, including wildlife, botanical species, soils, landscape views, water resources, or recreation use. Comments on reasonable alternatives to the proposed action would also be helpful. Also helpful would be the identification of specific issues or concerns which may be evaluated in detail in the analysis, as well as identifying other past, present, or future actions within or adjacent to the project area. At this time, I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Emily, who will begin the question and answer session.
Thank you, Whitney. That concludes the presentation. We will now have a question and answer section on the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Questions can be submitted using the Q&A box by following the instructions on the slide. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A feature to submit questions. Please understand that some questions will be answered live during this question and answer session, while some may be answered in writing in the Q&A feature. And we ask for a little patience while we organize and get ready to answer any of the questions that come in. Anyone can see all the questions answered in the chat by clicking on the Show All button. As questions begin to come in, I will facilitate asking the questions as the project manager, Whitney Worthland, will answer them. So we'll take a couple minutes now while anybody who's interested can use the Q&A feature to ask questions. The first question is, when will the RMP be revised? BLM is saying there will be a Nevada-wide RMP revision in 2023.
True. So the RMP amendment is included for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project when will be addressed in the environmental impact statement for that project. So they'll be combined. And so the RMP amendment will be carried forward and addressed in that EIS. There's no update right now on the BLM's timeframe to initiate the proposed Nevada statewide RMP revision. The proposed RMP revision for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project will be in the EIS. There's also an information website for further information regarding the BLM Nevada State Office statewide RMP revision effort. And we'll go ahead and put that in the chat.
Thank you, Whitney. Please feel free to continue to ask questions and we will organize them and get some responses to you as soon as possible. We appreciate your patience. So while we continue to organize questions coming in, I will bring up a question that was raised in the registration form, which was, please provide information about reclamation of land, restoration of soils, and vegetation.
So as part of the environmental review process, a restoration and decommissioning plan would be developed using the Southern Nevada District Office's standard restoration plan template. This restoration plan template will address restoration of temporary disturbance, which is typically lay down areas that are only used during construction. While the decommissioning plan would address removal of all components of the project and restoring the long-term disturbance of the entire right-of-way area. This plan typically contains standards for restoration of the site. These are based on reference site conditions and have performance measures that are certain percentage of vegetation cover, density, etc. And we typically compare that to vegetation in unimpacted surrounding areas. Vegetation conditions in the restoration area are required to be at least 60% of the reference site conditions to be considered successful. Additionally, alternatives and best management practices or mitigation measures developed during the environmental review process could also affect the restoration and decommissioning plan. For example, for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, the project sponsor is proposing to leave vegetation within the solar facility, and leaving vegetation in place during construction and operation and maintenance of the facility would help facilitate decommissioning at the end of the lifespan of the project.
Thank you, Whitney. Another question that came in during registration was, can you explain what mitigation, including mitigation fees, would be required for the project?
Mitigation measures have not been developed at this time. We're still early in the NEPA process. And as part of the environmental review process, mitigation measures would be identified to minimize or reduce potential effects to resources from the proposed project. That is something that we also look for in scoping. So scoping could identify some of those mitigation measures as well. Currently, we are requesting information about potential resource concerns, issues for analysis, and alternatives. And that information on resource concerns will help guide the BLM on development of mitigation measures, which includes mitigation fees for the project. These mitigation measures that are identified would be addressed as part of the analysis and presented in the draft environmental impact statement, which would be made available for the public review and comment. Also, in addition to mitigation measures, the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project would be required to adhere to applicable programmatic design features that are outlined in the solar PEIS.
Thank you, Whitney. The next question that just came in is, what mitigation requirements would BLM require to inform any adaptive management, especially for desert tortoise?
So similar to the mitigation question previously answered, potential mitigation measures for vegetation or wildlife within the solar facility project area would be addressed through best management practices, or as project design features, or alternatives analyzed during the NEPA process. During scoping, we do ask for any proposed measures that would reduce impacts to resources or concerns. And so that is something that scoping could also identify for us.
Thank you, Whitney. We appreciate everyone's patience. We're still organizing our next question. The next question says, would the same thing, treatment of cacti and yucca, happen at Rough Hat Clark?
Yes, so BLM is learning more about how alternative construction techniques work in practice. BLM is refining language around less impact construction techniques to focus on a suite of development practices that result in less disturbance to vegetation, which includes cacti and yucca soils, and also reduced impacts to hydrology. These could become best management practices for applicants who are proposing to leave vegetation in place, which would likely or could also potentially be analyzed within the range of alternatives for the NEPA process.
Thank you. The next question is, how many yucca are within the project area?
So belt transects within the project area were done in 2021, which were included with our botanical surveys. And based on that data, an estimated 56,818 yucca are within the project area. Once the botanical report is accepted as final by BLM, that report will be made available on the project e-planning or the project webpage for review.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the process of getting BLM to move all of these projects to California where the energy will be used, ultimately anyway, so that Nevada doesn't need to be the bearer of all the negative impact?
So BLM does not have a process for moving projects in this way. The applicant Candela Renewables identified and applied for the proposed project site, and BLM responds to that application in accordance with our application prioritization process, the variance process, as described in the solar PEIS.
Thank you. Next question is, how many creosote are on the site?
The botanical report contains vegetation transects that assessed baseline vegetation conditions. We cannot provide an estimate at this time for the number of creosote that may be on site, but those numbers could be extrapolated from the vegetation transects. Once the botanical report is accepted as final, like I said, we'll post that on the e-planning webpage for the project.
While we wait for the next question, I did just want to remind everybody that we were going to answer as many questions as we can live, but if we don't get to any of the questions, we will answer them in writing. And if you would like to see all of the questions, please use the Q&A function and click show all. The next question is, will existing trails and rerouting thereof be planning considerations? What recreation user groups is the BLM working with?
So impacts to routes and access is not known at this time. During the input period, though, the BLM received comments related to public access and recreation opportunities within the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project boundary. The information provided during the input period, as well as the information we collect during the scoping period, and also data currently being collected about route use within and adjacent to the project area will be utilized for the analysis in the EIS. The BLM is currently requesting information about potential impacts to public access and recreation within and adjacent to the proposed site, and any information to include any local knowledge of trails and routes within the project area and impacts to any recreational experience on those trails would be helpful during the scoping process.
Thank you, Whitney. Next question is, how old do you estimate the creosote root systems are?
The BLM does not currently have an estimate on the creosote root system age for the community within the Pahrump Valley.
I wanted to thank everyone for their patience while we continue to organize all the questions. The next question is there newer or amended plan of development available? If so, will it be posted to the e-planning website?
Yes, yeah, as we receive a more up-to-date plan of development that's been reviewed by BLM, that would be posted to the e-planning website for public review.
Next question is, how old do you estimate the Mojave Yucca root systems are?
Sure. Mojave Yucca can live to be approximately 100 to 150 years old, and their root systems would correspond to that approximate age range.
Thank you. The next question is, where would the applicant source the water for the project, including the 350,000 gallons that will need to be sprayed during construction to mitigate the dust hazard?
The project anticipates needing up to 100 acre-feet of water for the full construction of the project, which is estimated to take 12 to 18 months, mostly for dust control. And then after that, it would be 16 acre-feet per year that would be utilized for operations and maintenance. The project sponsor has indicated that water is likely to be trucked to site from a local source, but alternately, the project may install a well on site. Candela Renewables is currently working on updating the project water supply assessment to provide additional information on the identified water source to be utilized for both construction and operations through the development of the project. It should also be noted that the Nevada Division of Water Resources is responsible for the allocation of water resources within the state of Nevada.
Thank you. Next question is, would the Rough Hat site end up looking like the Yellow Pine footage at desertapocalypse.com?
So BLM is unfamiliar with that footage. If you would like to submit that in scoping comments or submit us an email with additional questions, we've put our email address in the chat. So we would appreciate that information if you would email it to us.
Next question is unrelated to the project. When will the recordings of these meetings be available to the public?
Sure. So we are anticipating putting those up on the project e-planning webpage within the next week. So we strive to do that as soon as possible. And so we will put that up on the webpage, which we have included a link for in the chat.
Next question is, would the local source for water be brought from Wolfenstein Construction in Pahrump like the water for Yellow Pine Solar?
So as we stated, the Candela Renewables is still working on identifying the water source and updating their water assessment, water supply assessment for the project. Once that is updated, we'll post that to the project e-planning page with the draft environmental impact statement for review.
Next question is, will tortoises be relocated to the same area as the Yellow Pine tortoise? How many tortoises can coexist in one area?
The BLM and Fish and Wildlife Service stumps that have set aside the Stump Springs translocation area that could potentially be used as a recipient site for the tortoises from the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. This site was also used for the relocation of tortoises from the Yellow Pine Solar Project. The translocation area was considered low density prior to translocation and is not considered to be in threat of overpopulation or potential resource strain through translocation efforts.
Thank you, Whitney. Next question is, has the BLM tested the soils in the Pahrump Valley for naturally occurring asbestos, which is known to be present in southern Nevada and which is known to be causing elevated rates of mesothelioma in southern Nevada?
The contractor assisting BLM with the development of the environmental impact statement and resource management plan amendment is conducting modeling and preparing a air quality modeling report for the project. Following BLM review and approval, information from this report would be utilized to analyze potential effects from the proposed action and also identify alternatives on air quality within the region. The report and air quality analysis would be available for review and comment during the draft environmental impact statement and draft resource management plan amendment public review and comment period.
Thank you. We appreciate everyone's patience as we continue to answer questions. The next question is, how far is the project site from the nearest residence in Pahrump?
The proposed project site is approximately 7 miles via Highway State Route 60, or sorry, not Highway, State Route 160 from the nearest residence.
The next question is, what effect would the project have on local bee populations? In particular, how would the removal or mowing of vegetation affect local bee populations?
BLM currently does not have information about baseline bee populations within the Pahrump Valley. Impacts to pollinators, including bees, could be included in the NEPA analysis if determined to be a concern. If you do have information or more information about bee species within the Pahrump Valley, we would really appreciate that information, and you can send it during the scoping period to the email address or the physical address that we've included in the chat.
Thank you. Just as an update to everybody, we have about 5 more minutes of time to answer questions live. And if we don't get to any of the questions live, we will provide responses in the question and answer function. So we will do our best to get to as many as we possibly can. Next question is, how would the removal or mowing of vegetation affect local insect populations, including moths, butterflies, bees, etc.?
The BLM is working with several U.S. Geological Survey research groups to study the impacts of less impact construction techniques on vegetation, soils, and also insects. This is also in collaboration with the USDA or the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In the future, we hope to have more data to address this question, and impacts to these species would be analyzed in the NEPA process.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the plan to conduct a landscape level environmental analysis? How will you address landscape level impacts?
So the BLM will evaluate the potential impacts on a landscape level and also on a project level through our cumulative effects analysis for the project. That includes the Rough Hat. We would look at the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project and other related and reasonably foreseeable actions within a given area to assess those cumulative effects. Additionally, public involvement, agency coordination, and Native American tribal consultation will help inform that analysis and further define the issues and uses within the project area.
Thank you. The next question is, we have attended many of these meetings and we have been unsuccessful in getting BLM and the federal government to understand we don't want another state's energy requirements solved in our environment, along with all of the damages and loss of resources we will suffer. Who do we need to speak to get this point across?
Your input during this process and our previous application evaluation and variance process is important. The comments we've received during that variance process, as well as the scoping period, will be considered and will help the BLM analyze important issues in the environmental impact statement.
Thank you. The next question is, how many Kit Fox burrows do you estimate are on the site?
Surveys for Kit Fox and their burrows were conducted concurrently with desert tortoise surveys for the project. There were no observation of Kit Fox that were recorded by the biologists on those surveys within the project area.
Thank you. The next question is, would herbicides be sprayed all over the project site?
So the BLM Southern Nevada District does require that projects of this size have a pesticide use proposal because of the scale of the project. The use of pesticides would be analyzed in the NEPA process.
Thank you. So at this time, we're going to be moving on to comments to make sure that we have an opportunity for everybody who signed up to be able to provide their comment. But we do want to just remind everybody that you can continue to provide questions in the Q&A function, and the BLM will continue to respond to them throughout the remainder of the presentation. And also, as a reminder, you can see all of the questions that come in through the show all function. We will now transition on to the verbal input section. We will not be answering questions live. If you have any additional questions, you can continue to drop them into the Q&A box and we will respond in writing, or you can email or mail any remaining questions to the BLM. As a reminder, anyone can see all the questions answered in the chat using the show all button. We're going to take verbal input following the order in which people pre-registered and said yes or maybe to wanting to provide public comments. Please use the raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen and the facilitator will open your microphone. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand with *9 and then unmute and mute using *6. You will see a 2-minute timer on the next slide, and this will display the amount of time you have for your public comment. We are reserving 2 minutes per public comment input. Your input will be included in the project public record. After going through the list of people who pre-registered to speak, we'll move on to anyone who may want to provide input that did not identify that they wanted to provide comments when they registered. The BLM wants to hear from all members of the public. However, out of respect for everyone's participation and input, we do ask that you follow these guidelines. Please stay within your allotted time. On the slide, you will see as the time is running out. We ask that you watch this and be cognizant of it, and wrap up your comment. Please be respectful of others that are speaking. Please refrain from profanity. If these guidelines are not followed, your microphone will be muted and we will have to move on to the next person. We'll go ahead and get started. Up first, we have Stephen Denham. please raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute your microphone. We'll move on to the next person, and it's Kevin Emmerich. Kevin, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, thank you. My name is Kevin Emmerich. My organization is Basin and Range Watch. I want to make another observation about the desert tortoise. So we asked you last night on the questions, what is the density? And you said 5.6 desert tortoises per square kilometer. And that's an interesting number, and by today's standards, we're finding that it's a high number. In fact, there are 19 desert tortoise recovery units out there that were officially designated by the Fish and Wildlife Service. And there are only 4 of those that have a higher density than this area in the Pahrump Valley. So what I'm getting at is a lot of your reports talk about this tortoise population kind of like it's not that important, simply because there's connectivity cut off by the highway in the town of Pahrump, but there are culverts under the highway. The town of Pahrump, it's very rural, and so it seems like it's a real mistake to put this project in an area that actually has one of the last remaining really good tortoise populations. As I said in the comments last night, the Fish and Wildlife Service officially said that there's a range-wide 37% decline in the species, but here we have the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project taking out a significant chunk of the habitat. You didn't really say what you're going to do with the vegetation, if you're going to mow it, if the applicant's going to clear it off. Even if they mow it, they're going to have to run it over with really heavy vehicles. So it's going to significantly damage the habitat. The BLM has a choice to protect the tortoise and deny this project, or approve it and play a part in enabling its extinction. So please make the right choice. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up, we have Heather Gang. Would you like to speak? Please raise your hand.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
First, let me say that I visited the site and I think it's a really beautiful place. The views are just spectacular in every direction. There are some large Joshua trees, which that's an endangered species candidate right now. As you know, thousands of Mojave yuccas, really big cotton top cactuses, ancient desert pavement soils. It's truly an irreplaceable old growth desert ecosystem. And that's not even mentioned in the plan of development. They just call it creosote brush white bursage desert scrub. I think that their visual impact analysis is flawed. They say it's a class 3 and claim that the primary potential viewers would be motorists traveling on State Route 160. And I disagree, because it will be visible from much of the Spring Mountains, including Trout Canyon, Mount Potosi. It will be visible from the Kingston, Nopa, and Last Chance ranges and the town of Pahrump. I know this because I stood there and I could see all those places. And they use the presence of other solar projects and transmission lines in the area to justify that more would be okay. And that's a recursive kind of thinking. And it's part of the reason that, you know, the cumulative impact is so important to be addressed. I also question their estimates of water usage. They say 800 acre feet of water during construction and 16 acre feet per year thereafter for washing panels. They don't seem to think it will be necessary to reapply water for dust control after construction, but there will be multiple roads and they'll be driving up and down the roads during the operational phase. Also, there's no mention of water being used during decommissioning. And surely that would be just as ground disturbing as construction. So I think they should probably add in another 800 acre feet for that phase. And finally, the decommissioning, I'm skeptical about the potential success of restoring vegetation that's hundreds of years old and the desert pavement. I'd like to see more, evidence that that could work. And we've seen from the Yellow Pine site that the mowing and leaving vegetation in place really doesn't work. It just doesn't survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Next, we have Simone Griffin. If you would raise your hand, we can unmute your microphone. Simone Griffin. Okay. We'll move on then to Robert Adams. Would Robert Adams like to speak? Please raise your hand and we'll unmute your microphone. Okay. Next we have Megan Labadie. Megan, would you like to speak? Please raise your hand. Next on our list, we have Jordan Jarrett. Is Jordan Jarrett here, and would Jordan like to speak? Next on our list, we have Dawn and Susie Hertz.
Good evening, Susie Hertz. I've attended quite a few of these meetings, and my tone and attitude is the same throughout. My overall feeling and opinion is that we're looking at a multitude of installations all being placed in the same geographic area here in Nevada, all with the same ultimate goal, which is creation of energy for the state of California. And it doesn't take an idiot to figure out that if California needs energy, California ought to be building their energy resources in their own state. What is happening is that we in Nevada are becoming victims of the desires of another state for nothing but a loss on our end. We're going to lose water resources, we're losing natural resources, we're losing visual resources, and the proximity to our town and the quality of life for us who live in Pahrump, even though this particular project is on the county line for Clark County, where our town is very, very close to the county line, is logically non-existent. I'm, for one, am becoming very, very impatient and very unhappy with the fact that the federal government and the agencies involved seem to have no qualms about just continuing with these projects, taking them on just as they come to you, one after the other, with no particular care for the fact that the logic is flawed. It makes no sense. It's all about the politics. It's obviously about the money, and it has nothing to do with the quality of life and the quality of the nature and the quality of the future of this planet and this region. And I implore you to please pay attention to those logical things, and please use some logic and take use of the BLM lands that are in the state of California and put the projects near the source and leave us in peace and leave our environment in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Next, we have Mervyn Boyd. Mervyn, if you would raise your hand, we can unmute you. Okay. Next, we have Christina Sanchez. If Christina Sanchez is on and would like to speak, please raise your hand. The next person who signed up is Shannon Salter. Is Shannon Salter on and would they like to speak?
Hi there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a couple of things. I realize, let's see, can you hear me? I don't see the time starting. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Realize that that this is the beginning of the NEPA process and there hasn't really been any discussion or decision on whether the developer would mow the vegetation down to 2 feet or whether it would all be removed and graded as is traditional. But I just want to point out that in the Yellow Pine environmental impact statement, it said that the vegetation would be mowed down to 2 feet, including the Mojave yucca and including the creosote. It said specifically that it would be treated on site, that it would not be removed from the base. And I was there and I documented that it indeed did get removed from the base. And like I said, we have plenty of drone footage. I have a lot of footage. I've got a lot of photographs on my website, mojavegreen.org. And there's a lot of drone footage on desertapocalypse.com. You can see drone footage of Yellow Pine and see that they just took out everything. And I mean, I videoed and photographed yucca being hauled out, yucca and creosote being run over and removed from the base. So that is not a true thing. That I don't know if they ever have done that or ever would do that, but I think it's really problematic that there was clearly no Bureau of Land Management oversight, that they weren't overseeing whether or not Kiewit Construction Company did indeed mow the vegetation down to 2 feet. So I think that really calls into question, what kind of oversight we have for anything, and whether anything would stay true to what they said.
Thank you, Shannon. Those are all the people who pre-registered to speak. So if anybody who did not pre-register would like to speak, please use the raise hand function and we'll unmute you. And that includes anybody who has already spoken. So Shannon, if you would like to speak again, I will unmute you. You can have another 2 minutes.
Yeah, I wanted to add something that I think hasn't been addressed or talked about, and I think you acknowledged that when I asked a question during the Q&A about how this vast removal of vegetation would affect insect populations, especially pollinating insects, bees, moths. And interestingly enough, I run an organization called Mojave Green, and my website's mojavegreen.org. And I was recently contacted by scientists at UC Davis, and they've been doing studies, and 2 of the studies now have been published in peer-reviewed journals. And it's about the effect of large-scale solar on bee populations, local bee populations. And there's also evidence that, bee populations intermingle. So, the population in the Pahrump Valley, does also affect populations of bees everywhere. And I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, it shouldn't take, years of study and going through the peer review process to figure out that, yeah, if you remove all the vegetation and all those flowering things, it's obviously the bees and other pollinating insects are also going to be gone. So I think that's something that we really need to think about, that things that we don't see, such as the insect kingdom, or that we don't see very clearly unless we're really looking for it. But that's something that really needs to be studied, because, in all the months that I spent out there camping outside the Yellow Pine Solar Project, I documented lots of bees, lots of butterflies, lots of dragonflies, lots of moths. And all of that so much of that vegetation is flowering. So I think that's a really big issue.
Thank you, Shannon. If there's anybody else who would like to speak at this time, please raise your hand and we will use we will unmute your microphone. Shannon, I see that you raised your hands again. I'm going to give just 1 minute to see if anybody else wants to speak, and then I'll unmute you again. Heather, I'll give you 2 more minutes.
Okay, I just wanted to say that the world is in the midst of an extinction crisis right now, mainly due to habitat loss. And especially the Joshua trees and the desert tortoises have limited habitat ranges, and they're being affected by climate change. And we just can't afford to sacrifice more habitat for these kind of organisms. We need to preserve more habitat, not destroy more habitat. And another thing is, I'm really skeptical of their ability to control dust on this site. The desert pavement is 1 pebble thick, and under that is like 3 to 12 inches of pure silt typically. And they did talk about permanent stabilization, but they don't explain exactly what that is. And we just need more details on how they're going to try to control dust. It seems like they're trying pretty hard at the Yellow Pine site based on how many water trucks we see heading back and forth all the time, but there's still plumes of dust coming off of there. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I'll just reset the clock and then Shannon, if you want to speak again, you can have another 2 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, just a couple things, you know, in regards to the water, I also question whether that 100 acre feet per year is accurate, because I can't imagine, I don't know why it would be less than a Yellow Pine. It's obviously the ecosystem there is very similar. You know, it's within a couple miles. So I'm not sure exactly how many acre feet they're spraying at Yellow Pine, but the Kiewit construction manager on site told me that they're spraying 350,000 gallons per day during construction. And gosh, it seems like it's going to be more than 100 acre feet per year. And I also found out that Wolfenstein Construction in Pahrump sold some of their water rights to NextEra Energy. And so the water trucks from Yellow Pine, the NextEra Energy site, fill up their water off of Crazy Horse Drive in the very south of Pahrump. And I think that's a type of gravel pit area. It's some big sort of industrial area that Wolfenstein must manage. But so I wonder if Wolfenstein would also be the local source to sell additional water rights to Candela Renewables for the Rough Hat Clark project. And, you know, I mean, that's obviously incredibly problematic because, you know, whether Wolfenstein or someone else sells water rights in Pahrump or the company drills a well on site, the basin is over allocated. You know, parts of the town are actually sinking because water has been drawn too far down. And it's a known fact that there's more water rights in existence than actual water. So they should not be allowed to drill a well on site or buy water rights from Wolfenstein Construction or any other Pahrump resident.
Thank you. Kevin Emmerich, if you would like to speak, you can unmute yourself.
Hello again. I wanted to bring something up about, I was the one who wrote in the chat about revising the resource management plan. Las Vegas Resource Management Plan, which covers this whole area that engulfs what is the Rough Hat Clark solar application. It's 25 years old, and in that 25 years, the desert tortoise has seen that 37% decline I told you about. Wouldn't it be good for you all to wait and put this solar project kind of on a pause, at least in this NEPA review, until you can revise that plan? I mean, if you do start the NEPA review of that next summer, of revising the plan, it would make sense for you to wait and see if you could actually use that plan to create a better long-term conservation strategy for the desert tortoise. On the water, another interesting thing, some of the BLM folks are new that they weren't here in 2014, but that was when the Hidden Hills Solar Project was being reviewed in Charleston View and adjacent California. That project from Bright Source Energy wanted to extract water from Nevada for their dust control and operation. And what's ironic is the Bureau of Land Management protested that with the Nevada Division of Water Resources. So the BLM is worried about water and sinking a well out there, and that well could not only affect the Amargosa River, but local wells and then adjacent Stump Spring. So just note that BLM was worried about water as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Heather, if you'd like to speak again, I'm going to unmute you.
I don't really have anything else at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Shannon, I saw you raised your hand again, so I'll unmute you.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to say also in regards to the kit foxes, I had asked a question in the chat about how many kit fox burrows were estimated to be on site. And the response was that they didn't find any kit fox burrows. And so presumably there were no kit foxes in the area of Rough Hat Clark. But I know there's no way that that's true. That's just not accurate, because I was camping right outside, really close outside the Yellow Pine Solar Project for about 8 months. And I documented kit foxes in, especially in the fall and the winter, every single night, multiple kit foxes, families of kit foxes. And I have video footage and photograph footage. But I also have hiked all over the area, and I can see kit fox droppings all over the place. So, including on the Rough Hat Clark site. So, there's no way that to say that the kit foxes aren't there. And, I don't know why they would have said they didn't identify any burrows. Maybe they just didn't realize that was their dens. But, it's only within a maybe 2 miles of where I was camping. So, obviously the range of the kit fox extends there. So there's definitely kit foxes. I've seen them, I see their droppings, they're definitely there. And they're just the cutest things, they're like cats. And they roam around in little packs. They'll go around a couple at a time. So I think that's something that should really be looked at too. And, it seems that people care more about mammals than they do about the reptilian world. So maybe that's just something to look into.
Thank you. We still have additional time, so if anybody would like to raise their hand and speak, please feel free to do so. So if anybody would like to speak, please feel free to raise your hand. But as it seems that we're slowing down on any speakers, we'll move to the closing now, done by Corinne Francis. But I do want to just mention that even after the closing, the BLM will stay on the public meeting until 8. So if later you want to speak again, please feel free to raise your hand and we'd be able to unmute you at that time as well.
All right. Well, I want to say how much I appreciate you spending your evening with us to discuss the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. We heard a lot of great questions and input to be considered as we move forward with this NEPA process. Please continue to send us your comments during the public scoping period through Monday, December 5th. Thank you again. I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you, Corinne. I'm just going to do one last reminder for everyone that if you do want to speak again, please feel free to raise your hand. If you do still have any final questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A function and we would respond to them as well. Thank you. It looks like we have a raised hand for a public comment. So Karen Byers, I'm going to unmute you and then you can provide your comment.
Thank you. Just a, this is a question that's been on my mind. I haven't asked it in all letters and all the input that I've submitted before. We had it explained to us by Mr. Pei that the BLM is doing its work. This is promote commercial development of the desert and get treasury from that. The way to do it, a good way to do it, and second and third ways to do it. He also said projects start and are put on a path as if they will be productive and profitable, and something and they can be ended if it's found they're not. How long did they go before someone discovered, say, the technology that we have now? It looked like 1998 surveys for the wildlife. Technology for those panels is 1990s material and infrastructure, and thinking the concept of genties and the whole regional power grid instead of modular, grid. How long would it take to shut a project down and back out of it? A season, 2 or 3 years? That was my question. No, it would be expensive, but far less expensive than going forward with this technology that we have now. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Karen. For anybody else on who's still with us, if you guys want to speak again, please feel free to raise your hand. Karen, I also just wanted to let you know that it was a little bit challenging to hear some of the elements that you were saying in the middle of your comment. So what would be really helpful is if you wouldn't mind providing your comments in writing, that would be very helpful to make sure that we don't miss anything.
Thank you very much. I will try to